Hello and welcome to episode, let me just double check, 6, would you believe it or not, of Wise Noise, the podcast about creative practice, the Creative Practice Podcast. And you would think 6 episodes in I'd have that bit right. I'm Pierce O'Halloran. I am a graphic designer and I run Wise Love Studio in the northeast of Scotland. I've gone a bit too radio friendly. I'm in the studio recording this. I've abandoned the outdoor intros. I was quite liking the excuse to get outside and do a walk and record this. But I'm realizing that it's been a bit windy up here in the northeast, and the old cheap lav mic that I was using isn't up to scratch, and the wind feedback is just really annoying when I come in. It's very inaudible. So I'm just recording in the studio, and shout out to my mate Pete Fletcher, who runs Black Bay Studio in the Isle of Lewis, which is an amazing residential recording studio over on the west side of the island. And I was having issues. I thought the audio that I was recording here was just not as good as it should be. Found it sounded tinny and distant. And after a little bit of investigation and back and forth on the old WhatsApps in terms of my setup, he asked me, was my mic the right way around? What? Mics have a front and a back, but apparently they do. And I, since day one, had mounted this Rode NT USB microphone the wrong way around. So for about a year, I've been recording my voice bouncing off the monitor and back into the microphone, which obviously didn't sound great. So I'm hoping that this is a big improvement on previous podcasts, but we live and learn. Speaking of learning, I'm really going radio friendly with my intro. The segues are smooth like butter. Chris Sanders is my guest, and he runs Right Aligned Academy, which is an online resource to learn from the world's best design studios. Kind of over and above that, Chris has been on a bit of a mission to smash gatekeeping within the industry and make it more open and accessible, and is very geared. You'll tell from this interview how passionate he is about the subject. And I did kind of realize as we were talking, we were both very much from the same backgrounds, kind of starting out in print factories and when it was dial-up modems days, and have been through the mill a bit. And this episode is quite deep, I suppose, compared to other episodes. You'll kind of recognize it when we do the bingo wheel of wisdom, which is normally a kind of light-hearted. It is a light-hearted little palate refresher. Normally after we've been kind of geeking out about portfolio stuff, and then we do that just before we head into the heavy stuff maybe, and it's a good way of, just talking about getting to know the person away from design as well. But yeah, I don't know, this tonally it shifts too dramatically, because I think we touch on very deep subjects from the start, and then we do the bingo wheel of wisdom, and then at the end Chris gets very personal talking about burnout, and I open up a bit as well. So the bingo wheel of wisdom kind of feels like a sort of whoopee cushion at a funeral, tonally, in the middle. I've left it in there for you to judge, but I was kind of listening back and considering actually maybe taking it out. Because it did a disservice, and that's not to say Chris's answers weren't fun, and it wasn't. It was good answers, but it just seemed to be a bit like this betrays the mood of the show. Because it is an excellent chat, and Chris has been doing this for a number of years now and has an excellent perspective on the design industry. And yeah, I'm pretty much just going to get into it, largely because I've got a really nice flapple wrap, which is a flaffle with apples in it. It's not really, I just meant to say flaffle wrap. Here's Chris Sanders. Hope you enjoy the show. Like, subscribe, do all the I don't mean to sound like a thirsty bitch every time, but yeah, please do all the things you need to do to, yeah, just keep some motivation to record these things. But yeah, here's Chris. It's ultimately there it was. But yeah, so is it over 500 right-aligned workshops or interviews you've done?
It feels like much more. I'm not sure how many it is, to be honest.
Yeah.
Because there was quite a lot of stuff that we did before, like this sort of type format before we even started to do like the actual, where we're at now, like the content for the website or for the actual, sort of educational led sort of content with studios. So that's been around about 150. So there was many, many more sort of conversations with individuals or sort of group panel debate sort of type things that are available, back cataloguing sort of type stuff. But God knows how much that is. And then you throw in the in-person sort of type things that we've done. So it's just, I don't really like to sort of count it too much because it's just all been a great, sort of journey into something completely new for me, from working primarily as a designer for clients, either that was either freelance or in agencies or building your own thing. So sort of, pivoting to still stay within the same sector, but do something, build something that there's no real format to follow. You've just got to do it by instinct, and I like that sort of stuff. But it's still quite scary. Yeah, it's just a wide range of things that we put out there that are just mounting up really. So it's instead of sort of maybe seeing it as a number or anything that could be seen like it's you've been going around for centuries. It's just great to be able to sort of see it, learn from it, and keep on trying to improve it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that I want to kind of get back to a little bit that part before you were a designer, because I think maybe people who are familiar with Right Aligned Academy, which is the academy that you set up which has great workshops and resources, and it's an educational tool for designers. A lot of people come onto the call but not realize your background. So can you kind of give me a bit of an explainer of like your career in design and how you kind of that inflection point where you kind of turn towards these educational resources?
Yeah, 100%. So it really started as someone that didn't have any formal education in terms of higher education, did like usual school, college, etc. And it was I just went straight into work because I just thought that was probably one of the best ways to learn, is just to get your hands on the tool, so to speak. But not really understanding or having any experience or portfolio or really sort of any knowledge of design. It was sort of starting really at the bottom. So it was a case of just entering with literally lifting up boxes of paper and putting them into printers. And it was sort of like really industrial sort of type of those, for just watching print runs all the time. And that sort of, within the same firm, it was a family firm that I entered in. Within that gave me an opportunity to sort of do, which was really more like, I suppose, artworking in some respects. It was watching people that were creating adverts for local media or producing brochures, etc. It was a travel firm. Back then, that was 1999. So that was very much print led still, and with a little bit of digital. But that digital was really very in
its infancy. Yeah. I do you still have those dial-up modems? Yeah. I remember in the printing pretty much the same time, but I had worked in a printing factory, and I had to go upstairs and ask them if I was allowed to go on the internet because it was charged like a phone call.
Yeah, it made that horrific noise. But even files they were sent. I think it's because it was maybe within the printed media was our main form of outlet for advertising. It was like ISBN numbers, so you had to send it through files. So like tiny little adverts in today's world, it's like a thumbnail. It would take about half an hour to get to the other side of the city. We were based in it, but at the time that was like magic. How did that get from there to there without any real understanding? You say that today, that sounds like we're talking about 5 centuries ago, but it was it's about 25 years ago
in our lifetimes. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah, but then I sort of stuck around at that, and then sort of. There was no real, what I always find quite interesting, the conversation around like, sort of what level you're at. So there was never any real gauge of where we were, who you were or what you did. I sort of think that merged into a junior role. It was in such a a sort of small environment, and there's only like 3 or 4 people within the team. Like, you sort of just took more responsibility on, but you were never given a certificate that said you're a junior now, or you had a badge that sort of sort of told everybody what your role was. And then from there, I then just sort of got a little bit more curious to think about the world of design and designers and clients and those relationships, because it was within an in-house team that was very confined to seeing the same things all the time. You did the same jobs on a weekly basis because it was just, you were selling a product that company made. But I was really interested in the idea that you could work within a creative team, but then work with multiple, clients in different sectors, different industries. That really opened my eyes, and that felt like the big time to me at that point. So I sort of applied for a role. Again, in them days, it was seeing it in the local paper or seeing it on a notice board. It's something really, again, it sounds really archaic, but it was the work that I was doing privately. So, the traditional thing of, young designer working with their mates who are in a band, or setting up a record label and creating flyers and posters. And I didn't realise that the person that I then went to applied, had an interview with, they had seen that work because they were also going to the same gigs and the same venues, and they'd like that work more than the work that I was doing on a day-to-day basis, like 9 to 5. So I won my first sort of junior role based upon my self-initiated work, which is quite interesting really for people that always question how to get into industry. And from there, it really went up, just sort of over the next sort of 10, 15 years, to midweight, senior, did a bit of freelance, went back into senior to creative director, and went back into freelance. So there's a lot of different, experiences of most of the roles that you could probably hold within the industry. And then I started my own agency, very naively, and that collapsed very quickly. And I did it again, and that collapsed again very quickly because I just wasn't prepared or have any knowledge apart from I'm going to start an agency without any sort of, understanding of what it was supposed to be or what we were trying to do. And then, thankfully, after a lot of heartache, I did it again, third time, and that started to work and progress quite well. But unfortunately, after about 4 or 5 years, that collapsed within about 20 minutes when COVID struck, because all of our clients were hospitality based. Mm-hmm. So we specifically targeted those sort of businesses at the start because we could see a gap in that market. But they were the ones that were hit hardest with COVID. And because they shut their doors, automatically all of our clients went with it at the same time. So that was, like, say, about 4 or 5 years building solidly, just to see it disappear, through no fault of our own. And then during the lockdown, I was homeschooling my daughter, and it was that period that I was thinking, do I want to go through that again? Do I want to put myself through that sort of mental pressure and stress to build something again and work with clients and start that circle? And I didn't. I just couldn't sort of face it. So it was a case of what can I do to stay within the creative space, but also then, try and build a future after the pandemic had ended. But we didn't really sort of see it like that at that time. It feels like a lifetime ago, but it was a very sort of scary, sort of, messy sort of time for everybody, wasn't it? So it was a case of just starting something little, and that small thing happened to be right aligned, which is sort of just snowballed from there.
Wow, yeah. It's very interesting what you're saying there. And there's a few points there in terms of when that sort of building an agency, were you actually trying to focus on building beyond being a freelancer then? Were you actually trying to scale up and even kind of look at employees when you're talking about building an agency in that respect? And what were the particular things that made the business fold, essentially?
Yeah, so I think first off was, when I say freelance, I sort of was made redundant from a position, and I just carried on like I was still there. Just the next day, I still had a mortgage to pay for, I still had a child to look after, and all the other bills that everybody else has to sort of meet. So I just sort of carried on like normal, really. But instead of going to an office and sort of being around people, I just sort of reached out to those that I'd worked with previously. And it wasn't a case of like, I'm going to go freelance and I'm going to be, going to create a website or a portfolio that had my name on it. It was always a case of I just continued like I was already still at the same place. It was, a strange mindset. Now, when I think about it now, I think, it sounds quite odd. But I was also never really keen on putting my name, not fronting it as myself. I've always had this sort of strange sort of thing where I always used to say we, even though when it was just me. It's this idea that you sort of, I don't know if it was just the industry I thought you needed to portray yourself to be bigger or better than what you were, and like you just fronting it on your own wasn't enough. But also there wasn't much education at that point, so it was I think the whole idea was that there was two very defined ways. If you freelanced under your own name, you basically just freelanced yourself back to an agency. And if you went under a studio name, that was you then sort of proclaiming that you wanted to, win your own clients. And I took that route because, again, I think I could hide behind a name a little bit more than you could hide behind your own. And also, if I was a client working for what I thought was a big business, would they just want to hire a person, or would they want to hire what looked like a business?
Right.
And I think that's the sort of approach I took. And the reason the first time the agency that started folding was purely because it was just done on a whim with a friend after a few drinks. I'm sure a lot of people could probably relate to that. And it was, the following weeks you realise that you're not probably as compatible as you thought you were, spending as much time as you did. And there was a reason why you only met at the weekend once every month.
Right, okay. Whereas in like the Monday to Friday, 9 to 5, they weren't as friendly.
Yeah, well, 9 to 5 was probably about 11 till 2. It wasn't really a professional sort of outfit. And then the second time we sort of positioned ourselves, or I positioned myself as more of a, you could sort of see the emergence of digital really taking off. A lot of businesses were going into e-commerce and those sort of things. And I sort of positioned it to people that run businesses that I knew locally, that we could do these things and just wasn't capable of doing these things. So, it was sort of trying to figure out WordPress on the fly, but you required some product photos and, didn't know a photographer, didn't know how to create WordPress websites, didn't know how to create a brand or anything like that. So you sort of was winging it to the point of just annoying people, which doesn't go down very well. And then the third time was learning from all of those mistakes and actually doing some of the things that I never wanted to do, like networking and going to more business, local, corporate sort of type events. And even though it wasn't something that I wanted to be doing at 6 a.m., in a local B&B on a B road, speaking to other businessmen that just basically wanted to sell you conservatories and golf clubs. It wasn't sort of the type of thing I wanted to do. You had to swallow your pride because they were tried and tested routes and you knew they worked. It was just very difficult from a creative mindset to be in those environments. But it really did help gauge it, lock doors in terms of naturally met people like marketing managers and business owners, which led me to sort of find a client within the hospitality sector, a hotel that was a franchise of a bigger global brand. And that was really quite transformational because first time I actually was doing work that I enjoyed because me and my wife would go to restaurants and, go to visit different cities at the weekend, or we'd go to a bar or a gig or, those sorts of things. So we were familiar with those environments. So it made sense to work within those spaces because you subconsciously knew things like menus and signage and print and all those sort of things. So we could speak authentically. And that did start to lead to hiring freelancers and thinking about employing people through circumstance more than choice. It was a case of there was too much work, so that was the natural thing. I didn't really want to particularly hire people. It was never the ambition, but it came about. But like I say, unfortunately, that was put to a halt because of the pandemic.
Pandemic, yeah. Well, it's funny how you kind of almost naturally niche down there, because there's one of the conversations I've been having with my guests is keeps coming up about the generalists versus specialists, and I've been kind of piling a list of pros and cons with both. And obviously that's a big con in terms of specialism if you're kind of wedded to one industry when that industry gets, the COVID-19 pandemic was a bit of an anomaly, but if that industry does face a downturn, you naturally kind of are going down with it,
Yeah, and sadly for that, because I can speak from a perspective of getting to know a lot of really nice people within that space, and it's never recovered. We're talking like 5 years since.
Yeah.
And it's on its knees deeper and deeper per day through, wider economics in the way of the world. And it's really sad to sort of see because it is a lifeline for a lot of people. And it is a fantastic sort of space to be creative, to work, from a design perspective. There was a lot of opportunities. Uh-huh. But to sort of see it, the niching down thing is weird because I spoke about this to a few people before, and I know that's not what we're here to speak about now, but it was this idea how a topic like that or an industry, I think sometimes the conversation around niching needs to be reframed. That because, and I can only say that through my experiences. You'd say, oh, we were niching, but once you scratched that niche, it really opened up to be huge. So it's sort of locally, there was 50 hotels, there was 50 bars, there was 50 restaurants, etc. Then you start to look regionally, then there's like 500, then you look nationally. And we were then started, at one point, we were working with a chain that ran hotels across Europe and America. You're talking about millions and millions of businesses that you can service. So you might be niching down in terms of what the industry, the sector or the topic or the theme of that industry is. But you can really then open it out into, right, now you've got every type of cuisine, in most cities, you've got every type of cafe in each city, and so on and so forth. So you can still stay quite diverse in terms of the creativity output. It's just that it might sort of, traditional sort of circles, you might say that that's more specialist compared to working with, everybody.
Yeah, absolutely. Definitely another kind of pro in that respect. I'm going to talk about Right Aligned Academy. It was born out of the pandemic, because I do remember you had because we first got in touch when it was the Coventry Design Festival, and you did an article. So was it you started out promoting, because obviously you're based in Coventry, so you had initially had a plan to kind of host a series of events just based from this Coventry Design Festival that then morphed into Right Aligned, became more broader, general, national thing.
Yeah. That was, so again, during COVID, it was a case of what could we do, or what could we start to do and plan and think about. Coventry at the time was the City of Culture, the National City of Culture, which is sort of a government-celebrated initiative. And because of the pandemic, put everything, it screwed everything up, for want of a better phrase. The City of Culture thing started a little bit online, or it started a little bit remotely, but it then morphed into the second year, and it was quite a strange sort of time. So I thought, something like the Design Festival could be quite good, because I think, like a lot of places, there's a big emphasis through the public sector on arts and culture, but I think design can fall through the gaps on that conversation quite quickly. There's the wider cultural and artistic communities, but design seems to be seen as a little bit of a little bit more elitist, I think, by some communities. So it was a case of, why don't we sort of look to maybe jump on the cultural award bandwagon a little bit to sort of see if we can get their support. And I know of great venues and places and a lot of younger people that wanted to find the inspiration, but there wasn't really much of a community in the city of Coventry for design agencies, for instance, or communities that came together at events, etc. So could we bring in people like most festivals do, bring them in just to sort of show younger people, or show the wider community, some of the leading voices maybe, or some of the bigger work that's going on in the world. But because it was a pandemic, that was just really a series of conversations that led to a sort of social media page, just to sort of draw up interest. And as a sort of a fringe type online series to gain awareness for it, we started something called Right Aligned, that's what that was originally. It was just a name picked out of the design jargon handbook. It was just, that's all it was. It was a way of just having this sort of interactive sort of sidearm to the festival. That really took off more quicker than I thought in terms of generating attraction. And really, the festival idea got put to one side, and it's still sort of bubbling away. But it's we decided just to keep the digital sort of side of talks running, because they were they were really our only form of output at that time. Unable to leave the house very, very much during those 2 years. Still homeschooling my little girl, and that digital was quite a simple and quick way of building up building up that awareness of what we were doing for the wider perspective.
Yeah,
and it's just rolled on from there. Like I say, it's just morphed into something I never thought it would.
Yeah, I've subscribed to these talks from the early days, and I do find it fascinating. You do have some, as you said there on the title of the website, learn from the world's best design studios. And that's what's fascinating to me. It is properly the world's best design studio. So, I'm amazed that they were so forthcoming. It's just, in terms of when you email these people, are they that forthcoming? I should ask, when you send an email, do you actually have to pester them a little bit, or are they quite willing to kind of come on?
I think in the early days, everybody was as bored as I was. So I think that they had lots of time on their hands during lockdown. So, my first port of call was to reach out to all the people that I had admired from a distance, that those people were agencies. And I think that I was amazed at how quick the response was to those early conversations that, like we're having here. James at Koto, James at 2 Times Elliot, the guys at Bits and Batsy, and so on and so forth. And I'm not really keen on sort of throwing out, big, well-known names too lightly. But I was really surprised because my career has always been very sort of selfish in some ways. You just focus on what you needed to do. You got the ladder. You just got to sort of keep afloat, make it sustainable. So when like I said a few minutes ago, pivoting to then face the industry and work to try and support the industry is something completely new. And I sort of think, am I the right person to do this? Will anybody accept me? This unknown person from the middle of the UK? Is anybody interested? I mean, thankfully, I say all of the people that we initially reached out to have said yes. And I would say 99% of the people have said yes very, very quickly. Obviously, there's sometimes difficulties finding space in the diary of teams that are increasingly busy. But I think what we've always tried to do is that we give people the freedom, even though we have a rough theme. The website is now based upon this idea of teams or freelancers sharing their, how their work was made. So we give them the freedom. I have no control. I never want to see what they present beforehand. It's entirely up to them to sort of show that off because they know their work better than I do. And I've never wanted there to be an identical sort of way of presenting for Writerline. I love the idea that their individuality shines through by them just being them, and that's amazing. So we've been very fortunate to sort of have agencies that I presume most people will recognise if they've been around long enough. Like I say, you've got Design Studio who have now changed name to Further, but like say Ragged Edge, Koto, all of those guys that are producing really high quality and a high awareness work. Some of the stuff that gets featured in all the big blogs and magazines and on all over the websites, and they've got big followings of their own. But there's also a big focus on, and that's why I feel a little bit shady about learn to the world's best agencies, because it's not all about that. There is a high percentage of that work because it naturally catches attention and people are really interested to know about high profile work. But there's also a lot of teams there that are just small regional teams. There's individuals. There's groups that are in big cities, but they're not as well known purely because some of their clients maybe don't attract as much attention. So I think it's really important to give those guys that space too, because it's a real cross section of the industry, and it's an industry that I know. It's not just a bit of a distorted view of just the top 1%. It's hopefully over time it'll build up to be a collection that represents everybody, different parts of the world, different sort of sizes, different approaches. And then I hope the biggest dream is for people to realise that there are many, many ways to have a career in the creative space. It's not just about relocating to London and working for one of the top 10 agencies. It's about doing it in a way that works for you based upon your circumstances and where you are in the world.
Mm-hmm. And one of the, absolutely, I'm a big fan, and I do, what I love about it is that you normally have it on sort of Friday mornings, and I find it a really nice way of kind of getting it on and sort of dabbling away at work at the side, and then tuning in and getting the conversation and watching these top studios open their files, and that's one of the things I love about it, is the fact that like sometimes I sort of have the Templo branding there on screen, and you do sort of see the sort of final finished articles on certain kind of blogs, like under consideration, etc. But what you kind of get with the talks is that they actually expand upon it a bit more, and they'll show you sort of roughs. They'll show you, sort of the gritty kind of illustrator mood boards, and it further kind of expands upon the rationale increased upon. And I think it's so important, especially like obviously with Templo and their work for GF Smith. Obviously that was like fairly divisive branding. But what I found about kind of going onto the workshop was that it was a better way of getting behind the agency's rationale and their thought process behind it, and whether if you still had issues with the actual execution or not, you still have to respect like the consideration. I've found a lot more appreciation for the consideration and thought that went into these projects.
Yeah, and I think that from a personal perspective, since starting Writerline, it's changed my perspective on the industry, 100% compared to when I was an actual designer. Is that something like that project's perfect, and also Koto did a brand called Bolt, probably about 2 or 3 years ago now. Both of those projects the Tempo one and the Koto one, I invited them on specifically because I'd seen the backlash online. Because I think it's really, really important to put context to everything that we see. This isn't just about seeing the logo. And it's ironic, really, is that our industry, or people in our industry, shout to the public that, a logo doesn't make a brand, or a colour system doesn't make a brand, etc. But as soon as somebody releases a logo, everybody piles on it to say that's crap. And it's the irony of that is sort of isn't lost on me. Mm-hmm. So it's the reason for asking those guys on, because I think it is ever so important to break down the barriers of, for me, when I first started out, I always wanted to go into the agencies I admired, but it was just never possible unless you were hired. It was because I'm more interested in not necessarily their output. I was more interested about how they got from A to B. I was just that sort of size side of it. Is really important. That's the reason why majority of what we do and why we are so process led is because I think it doesn't just take you behind the scenes of how the project was built. Because I think seeing things like mood boards and how people use things like Figma, etc., just to compile all these ideas before they then they boil it down and filter it out into a final solution. I think that's important. But I think it's really important, even more important, is to hear the voices of the people that did it. So that was, say, Tempo. Pally came on and talked about it in a way that was just nobody else could. No case study could ever portray the way that he spoke about that. And ultimately, case studies, I think, are for clients. They're for people to go, oh, they're amazing, I want to work with them. They're not really for us as designers. We just look at them and go, oh, that looks bloody amazing, I'll never be as good as that. That's it. It's usually quite a way just to feel inadequate. So I think we need to sort of, again, realign the conversation to sort of understand that as creatives, it's really, really important to understand how people crafted their ideas. So whether that's the way that they communicate with a client or rewrite a brief or build some sort of form of strategy out, because otherwise all of these phrases and terminologies and the output then also becomes this sort of promised land that everybody aspires to be like. But really, if we take some of the thought processes and the way that they think and the way that they germinate ideas, if we use some of those to improve ourselves, then I hope we'll then see a less homogenized industry and people just start to lean on their own ability and thinking, but they just are influenced ever so slightly by some of those more smaller nuance points that agencies bring together. And I know for me, when I look, I'm naturally the most privileged person because I've seen all of these, and I've got, got fortunate to get to have spoken to a lot of the people behind it. And that's what separates them. I think most people are equally as good as each other when it comes to creativity in a design industry, for instance, at certain levels. But it's the way that people find curiosity in things and they bring that influence into their work. It's what they do privately, and it's the teams that they build, the cultures that they make. Mm-hmm. That's what allows them to stand out as an agency that's different to any other agency. But it's ones that seem to just follow what others do or try and replicate it, then just become just a shadow of that thing that they're trying to replicate, as opposed to shining brighter.
Yeah, it is fascinating. And I do remember on the Templo talk, everybody was so positive in the feedback because I think Pally was like, I'm open, hit me if you want to be cruel or whatever. I think he was expecting that, but I think it was really positive. And I don't know if it's that fact of like, we kind of forget about, the human side of the designers, as in when you're sort of there with a designer. And again, I kind of go back to appreciating the craft and appreciating very relatable in terms of like these dealing with the client handling and all the steps you have to the battles that you kind of have to win in terms of just getting this out there. So it's like and appreciating that you're doing the best for the client essentially, and not always kind of doing necessarily what you want to do, but kind of doing the best under the circumstances. And all of that was very relatable. And that's one of the things that I kind of get from these talks. Even I remember tuning into the Gala's talk about their work for Unfold. And I thought it was great to start. They just kind of said, like, we totally undercharged for this job. It was, we charged like $2,000. And he was like up front with the kind of thing in terms of like, but you know what, when it was in the studio, we just said we're just going to do the best job possible. And I thought
that's really relatable, isn't it? That sort of stuff. I've done that a million times in the past when I first went freelance, undercharged, without really realising how long things are going to take. But you still want to do great things. Or people that go above and beyond and do more work than what's necessary. Or I think there was a design studio talk, one of the first ones for Centre Parks, and they did what they were told to do or asked to do. And then there was a big part that they just took it on their own back. You know, an agency of that size and reputation at the time.
Yeah.
They just took it on their own back to create future-proofing work that the client didn't ask for, but they thought it was right to then push the limits of that project to sort of show in 6 months or 12 months, it's not just going to fall flat on its face. You know, there's potential for this to be a 20, 30-year project.
Yeah.
We've been commissioned to rebrand Centre Parks Europe, but they wanted to really show what it was capable of doing, you know, in the long term. And going back to the Smiths one with Templo, I think it was fascinating that the narrative when that project was released, the case study was released online, it was a 50-50 split from what I saw. But the negative split was so voracious in its hate. It was just like outstanding. I just couldn't believe it. You know, I'll just roll my eyes every time I see that sort of output. It's up for debate why people do that. You know, if it's to generate attention for people to look at them, or if they genuinely just feel that disgusted at life that they have to sort of slate other people's work. But I've been on the side of that in the past in my career. And it's really harmful because you put your heart and soul into creating these projects. Whether you get it right or not is a different argument. But when people just sort of really pile in on you, it's horrible. But like you say, when he was presenting that, it was a very positive. But little things like when they changed the name of the colours, I remember seeing things like what's this woke nonsense? What's all this sort of really illiterate sort of type feedback? But when Paddy explained the reason why, and to fit the modern world, and some of these references are a bit archaic now.
Yeah, colonial kind of references,
Yeah, and it makes perfect sense. But even like the logo that you've got there on screen, where when it was moving, and everyone was saying, the narrative was about how terrible it looks when it doesn't move, and how sort of childish it is, and it's a rip off of things like Paul Smith. I think that it's really, really important for people to take a step back. I'm not saying come and tune into what we do, but go and find some sort of context from somewhere. Reach out to the agency, go and read their case study. Don't just have a knee-jerk reaction based upon one slide that you've seen from a project that took them 12 months to create. It's a really important lesson, I think, for people just to sort of breathe a little bit and soak it all up and start to process your own thoughts in time, and don't just follow the herd and jump on the bandwagon.
Yeah, I mean, it's like critique is important in the industry, and it's not to sort of like everything that comes out to kind of like blindly kind of go, oh, this is amazing. But there's a healthy critique and a very negative, as you're saying, just this sort of the toxicity of pylons that kind of it's really unhelpful. And I think it just devalues our work generally. So if you're sort of piling in on like that and you're not being constructive about it, you're ultimately doing yourself a disservice, because you're kind of, if we're sort of cannibalizing ourselves in the industry. But yeah, I wanted to talk about, like, one of the things I like about Right Aligned is the price point as well. So you when you come onto a live talk, it's by donation, and the courses there, you can kind of download them for like $5 each. And I think it's really good value. The subscription for a year is like 60 quid, and then you get all the courses and all the resources. So that seems a little, kind of on the low side in terms of like what I've seen in terms of what other people charge. But I take it this is part of your sort of values and your ethics of just trying to not keep too much and keeping it as open a resource as possible, while at the same time not actually completely giving this stuff away.
Yeah, it's a conversation that's runs around my mind ever since we even put a price point on it. I was reluctant to do that in the first place, but the reality is that we all have to keep a roof over our head as best we can. So there needs to be some sort of point there, and that has changed. It's fluctuated at different points, just to sort of see what's the community sort of deemed to be worthy for what we produce. There is a general sort of structure behind all of the madness. There is actually some sort of thinking, more commercial sort of thinking. For me, the live webinars that we do, I've always wanted them to be. We did have a set price point at one point. I think it was about £5. But I'm really conscious of accessibility in our industry, and that comes in many shapes and forms. But in this instance, financial accessibility is really important. So, if we want to sort of speak or communicate, or even just have people on our side, part of our tribe, from students all the way up to creative directors, I think if we give them the power to choose what they decide to pay, then that's a real nice way to work those live sessions. So we have a lot of students that will pay £1, all the way up to creative directors or agencies. So we've got a session coming up soon with Mike Reed from Reed Words. So people that are tuning into that about from a copyright perspective and a language understand his position in the industry. So the majority of people are paying a bit more for that because it's Mike. I presume that's the reason why. But if we have less or lesser known smaller agencies or freelancers, will attract a different demographic, and they might be they might be students or younger juniors, etc. Because of maybe their current circumstances financially, they've got accessibility by just paying £1. Mm-hmm. So it just feels, whether that's a model that's sustainable, I don't know, but it feels like the right thing to do. It feels like if I was starting out, and a lot of the time, the decisions made internally are based upon what would we have wanted when we were starting out, and those sorts of things make it really make us feel just that little bit better about ourselves. But there's also, from the webinar perspective, all of the proceeds from those sessions get reinvested back into the business. Mm-hmm. So that's back into the initiatives that we do, whether it's we run an awards sort of program, which is you can't enter, you can't pay for it, you certainly don't get charged to be part of it. We just send that to people because we think it's nice to recognise the work that people do in their community, and not just make them fill in excruciatingly long forms about this, that, and the other, and charge them a fortune for it just to make money. It's about creating a community that's, in my eyes, Right Line is turning something that I'd like it to be a legacy that lasts way beyond my career and my life. It's something that would be lovely to pass on to the community and be owned by the community. How that looks, I don't know, but it's something that I think has. There's a need for it to exist within our industry. Yeah, and these sorts of things are important. So, price point is always going to be something that I'm conscious of, and like I say, there's not a huge amount of data to go by. It's just about what do we feel is acceptable for people to get. And in my eyes, I'd like the idea that the more we create, the less, the cheaper it gets. The theory that, like some sort of Netflix type capacity where you grow the community so that everybody can pay less because there's more people paying something is more important than having a smaller amount of people it appeals to and they all have to stump up 400, 500. And I do sort of see courses and I see platforms and I feel like they're quite exploitative, if I'm honest. I think that there's no need for people to be charging thousands of pounds just to share insight that's quite freely available in a lot of places. And that's even to higher education, what people charge for that sort of stuff is just is just unreasonable. I think beyond unreasonable. So for me, it's a case of what can I sleep easy knowing that we're not trying to rip people off. That it makes life tight and things are difficult and you've got to sort of go through the hard parts and hopefully that's behind us. But there's also that simple thing that we're appealing to primarily grassroots creatives. And many of those don't have that luxury of middle or elite level backgrounds that could afford them the luxuries that a lot of people have done in this industry. Most of us are sort of just day-to-day people, working class people that want to have a career in the creative space, but it's damn hard if you have to keep on paying a fortune for subscriptions and software and hardware and all the other things that come with it. So if we can make people's lives a little bit easier, then we'll do that.
Yeah, that's amazing, man. I think I love all of that. That it's like you're trying to almost be a gentle hand on the tiller in terms of like not being, as it said, it's not about you. it's you're building it for trying to get to a place where it's for the community by the community almost. And
the idea of things like studios that are owned by employees. I love that mentality. It's just. I don't have that cutthroat commercial businessman mentality. It's just not in me. I can't change that, and I don't want to. Reading Richard Branson's book is not going to change that. More than anything, it's going to confirm that I don't want to be that way. So, nobody would make me more pleased if I could turn off the price point completely and just sort of say, here's access, because, once we can find sustainable routes of income in other areas, that's something that I might even look towards. So, but it's got to be done with, for me, it has to be done with the long-term benefits in mind, because I've seen so many things come and go in our space. People get used to something, they're comfortable with it, and it disappears because it loses funding. So things like that, for us, I don't want to be a professional form filler for the arts clubs. I want to find a sustainable platform that allows us to be, we can direct our own future for the benefit of the community, not, beg, steal and borrow just to, squeeze by, and then, you never know what's going to happen from year to year. We need to make that sort of model work for us. And at the moment, it's a slow trickle, but it has legs, so we'll keep at it.
Yeah, great, man. And it's starting to come offline as well. You're putting real life IRL sessions together. So I've seen a few, you've hosted a few in here already, but I see there's some popping up in Australia, some events you're organising.
Yeah. So last March, so it'll be 2 years, no, not last March, 2 years March, we started something called Process, which is highly imaginative title, but it's sort of just what it says on the tin. But again, it's a sort of spin on what Right Align does. So I always sort of like to sort of classify it. Right Align is the 9 to 5 disciplines of working in design. So we've got, as you know, we have brand teams, motion, etc., etc. And I've always wanted to create. It's probably actually it flips off the design festival idea that I had for Coventry. It's always wanted to create in-person events because there's a huge amount of value in them. But because of COVID, again, a lot of things just disappeared. Me and a guy called Pete, we met in Manchester, and we just sat had a drink and just said, there's a lot of events that we used to attend and always felt quite cold, a little bit networky, sort of same old characters talking about the same old sort of stuff or just going through their portfolios. And, industry events always give me the shivers a little bit, to be fair. So it was a case of, can we create something that was a little bit more reflected us as people, passions for the wider culture, not just design, music, art, fashion, film, all those sort of things. And how can we sort of package that up into a type of event that's made for creative people, but not specifically designers. It's made for the creative community as a whole. Anybody that's sort of sees the world in colour instead of just black and white. It's aimed at those really. So Process was born in Manchester at a place called Joshua Brooks, which is primarily a nighttime space. And we just sort of tried to mix things up by using those environments. For instance, the speakers in Joshua Brooks are in the DJ booth, but the screens are on the opposite side of the room. So the whole idea is that everybody's not staring at the speaker and making them feel awkward and, a little bit sort of anxious. But we're also lean heavily on the idea of regionality. So we don't bring people in from London just to speak in a faraway city and then disappear and nothing. There's no long-term impact in that format for me. Our idea has always been the hosts are regional, the volunteers are regional, and all the speakers are from those regions. And that's why we then started it in Leeds, we did it in Sheffield, London, Berlin, Sydney and Melbourne. And we're speaking to quite a few of the people about taking that sort of theme and that mentality to other parts of the world as well. So it's been lovely to see it been embraced so well. And the things that get shared, we sort of try and ban portfolios as much as possible, without being too police-like. We want people to share their personal stories, and that's why it works well where Right Align is the day-to-day 9 to 5 and Process is the after hours. Nobody wants to talk to anybody at 9:30 at night in a bar about their latest piece of typography, do they? I don't think I do. I prefer to know about their life story and I prefer to know about the worst things in a non-sadistic way.
Yeah,
I don't sort of bear all horrible parts of their life, but I'd like to know about the things that went wrong in their career, just because I think I can relate to that. Sometimes I think the industry is so hell bent on success stories and elite levels of output, and it leaves like 99% of the people feeling inadequate because we can't reach that level. We're not all Peter Saville. Majority of us sort of just are plugging away our best that we can, and we go through some pretty weird stuff during our careers. I don't know why. I think most of it I'd rewrite if I could. But, without those things, I don't think I'd be doing what I'm doing now, because if it was all plain sailing, I would have no reason to stand there and bemoan everything. So it's there's like a balance there where we want those evening things to be enjoyable. A reason to go, for me, isn't to go and just sort of sit and listen to somebody tell me about how great their portfolio is. It's the reason why I go is because it's a great social experience, just to sort of understand that I'm not the only one that's had toxic bosses and horrific clients. Maybe it just makes me feel better. That's why I go.
Yeah. Being able to relate to people about the woes of the industry is definitely one of my favorite things about these events,
And also, quickly, I think that a lot of people, they like us, and I think we maybe sometimes we work alone or we work remotely and sort of don't have that connection with people regularly. But I think also that a lot of people that I'm experiencing are fearful of saying this stuff. They're fearful of, and I'm in a different position because I don't have a client maybe watching me on LinkedIn thinking I'm not going to work with them because they've swore or they've shared something they've overshared. Mm-hmm. But I think it's really important to give people this space and to create environments and safe spaces where they feel like they can be part of that conversation. Mm-hmm. It's like a private club without membership sort of type vibe. Mm-hmm. People sort of speak. We've had speakers share some of the most detailed experiences they've had as a human, mm-hmm. and a room full of 100 strangers all crying, and 5 seconds later all laughing.
Yeah.
Crying in a sense that they feel like some sort of relief. There's true emotion, but we stupidly bottle it up for an industry that's so focused or so heavily influenced by us expressing ourselves. And creativity comes through us being able to express ourselves. But there seems to be a hell of a lot of people just are unable or don't feel comfortable enough to express their true self. They hide behind the work. Mm-hmm. And I love the idea that we've created these spaces where people do they come and they're in hysterics or they're in tears, and it's sort of like this collective sort of sigh of relief. And it's sort of just, it's really, really an absolute privilege to be sort of stood at the back of most of those rooms and just soak it all up.
Amazing, man. It's just so good to have that outlet, and it's God, this industry is so kind of a roller coaster of emotions. It's great to kind of get out there and let it out, I suppose. This is the bingo wheel of wisdom. I'm just going to do a turn for the camera because I've learned, because I was rattling away with the bingo wheel of wisdom while I was asking questions, but the feedback was the sound of the wheel turning was pretty apocalyptic in the ears. So I've pre-rolled your numbers, Chris. I have 90 questions here. So I will get onto those and ask you quick fire questions, okay? So first out of the hat is 4. Are you a morning person or a night owl?
Oh, morning. Very early mornings. Very early night.
Are you good with getting to bed at a decent hour then to kind of maximize your morning output?
Yeah. That's quite a relatively early bedtime, but like I say, very early mornings when you've got to deal with people on the other side of the planet at 4 a.m.
Yeah, I'm a morning person too. I do love getting up way before the family are up and getting a head start to my day. 35. What's the capital of Colombia?
Bogota.
Oh, well done, man. A knowledge of design and geography. 35. CMYK or RGB?
CMYK.
Yeah, all day long.
Yeah,
because that's the old school printer in you. You just that never dies.
I like the vivid the how vivid the colours are with RGB, but I just love paper. So that's it.
Worst client story in exactly 3 words.
Bloody fucking accountant.
Oh, brilliant. 65. Are you YouTube or Netflix?
Netflix.
Netflix, okay. 35. Quality or quantity?
Quality.
It's got to be quality, yeah. What's your desert island font? So that one font that if everything else was deleted off your hard drive, you had one font left. What could you survive on?
Comic Sans, just to piss off the designers.
Nice, yeah. Good. That would be a fairly torturous desert island. Yeah, 46 is related. Would you rather be up a mountain or on a beach?
Beach.
Beach, yeah. I'm not much of an outdoorsy type, which clashes with my wife's sensibilities of trying to climb every mountain in the Aberdeenshire area. 57, if your work was a song, what genre would it be?
Heartbreaker by Led Zeppelin.
Nice. So yeah, right aligned is that. I think that's enough for the buzz. I'm actually running out of numbers because, like, you've been the sixth guest on. I've had a no repeat guarantee, so I actually don't have that many balls left. So we're going to drop that one, Chris.
I think there's a game show. There's a YouTube game show in that. I like that.
I know. I need to get like a sparkly suit on that I kind of change into and a bit more of a microphone.
Alcohol. That would make that more fun.
Yeah. It makes good for the Reels clips. That's my excuse anyway. So to finish up then, Chris, we have the heavy dessert menu. I'll just put it up on screen. There we go. So the topics are how to price your work, the AI elephant in the room, the red flags of a nightmare client, specialist versus generalist, self-promotion without the ick, avoiding burnout, your design and how to sell it, things they never tell you about in design courses. So which are you taking from the menu?
Now I look at them. I'm no good. I wouldn't answer probably the right answer for anyone, but I think number 6, avoiding burnout, because I've experienced it quite frequently. I don't know if I could say how to avoid it. I could say how to get it, but it's we could do our best to try and find a solution.
Yeah. So tell me about your burnout, and is it something that regularly happens? And as much as you sort of put systems in place, you almost seem to get burnt out on a regular basis then? Yeah.
So before starting right along, I'd never experienced any of these, like say poor mental health, burnout, imposter syndrome. I've never really experienced any of those. And ironically, since starting this, which I thought would be really liberating from a creative perspective, I've experienced all of those quite heavy doses in the last sort of, might be 5 years next month, right along. Yeah. But it's so, and then they've all been really inadvertent, not expected them, and then when it's arrived, it's been a real sort of, it's quite a difficult thing to deal with because you don't really understand what it is that's happening. And then you sort of start to sort of maybe piece together a sort of, thankfully having a supportive, small knit family very close by, and people can sort of start to see changes in you for the first time, or that maybe point towards bigger problems. But burnout is a funny one because I think, like a lot of things, maybe you don't want to downplay people that have got things really serious. So you don't want to just sort of flippantly say, "Oh, I feel like I'm burnt out. I'm going to have a day off," like an excuse to not do anything. But for me, it was. I think it really combined, and I don't know what the official diagnosis is of something like burnout, but it just combined a hell of a lot of things, such as feeling completely lethargic and unable to, literally get off out of bed. Sort of just thinking about just deleting the business. Mentally just thought, what's the point? What am I doing? Nobody cares. I'm not the right person qualified for this. Am I just sort of just making stuff up just to try and create a platform or a business that makes money? Or is it, there's far better people out there, far better qualified people out there. What am I trying to achieve? And is it, does the world even need this stuff? Mm-hmm. So there's like there was a lot of sort of internal questioning, as well as physical, inability to sort of, lift yourself. And it's quite a scary place to be when you don't know what that is. And also in maybe the time of that I was born and brought up was still that very much, you've got to be strong, you've got to be the workhorse. That even though those sort of things are quite sort of psychological, and maybe they're just, you think that yourself, people don't actually tell you that. There was just that culture of the time, the male role model, if you were lucky to have one, mm-hmm. just when it worked, and the female role models, stayed at home, or, did the stereotypical things. And mm-hmm. it was the idea that someone like me, I'm 44 this year, 45 next month. Majority of my youth was around that sort of idea that nobody talked about their feelings, shared anything. It was just, you met your mates and we just watched football, or you went out with your dad and you just chain smoked in front of you and you just talked about football, or you went. Well, if you weren't talking about it, you were at it, or you were doing it yourself. And it was it was like literally beer on fags, and that was sort of like the first 20 years. That's all I saw of my life. So it was the whole idea that you then maybe sit down and talk about your emotions or your feelings, or you're unable to do a hard graft for a day of the week, was just it didn't happen. So he just keeps on pushing on, and I think that's quite detrimental in the long term. So it was really that happened, and it was a case of starting to look after myself. But then you just naturally slip into this idea, especially building something from scratch. And I think probably in a weird way, the biggest blessing and the biggest curse is that I care so much about this. And it's sort of, I really started to realise that there's a lot of people that, it's like looking back 20 years, there's a lot of young people out there that are really lost. There's less opportunities. The world is really hard to navigate. And I think if we could be that voice of reason and a bit of trust based upon real lived experiences. So the whole idea of sort of saying, I'm just going to give it a rest for a bit. Yeah. So it can't happen. You've got to keep your foot on it and keep on going and going and going. And I think that's really led to sort of a downturn in personal health and all the things that surround it. So, and then that combined with things like, sometimes the best way to deal with it is hard to say, but it's at the bottom of a bottle. Sometimes, you can't go to sleep, so you maybe drink a bit too much. You can't, you get up too early, like I was saying earlier about being mornings. I'm not lying. I get up at 4 o'clock most days.
Wow.
And I'm at it straight away until like sort of 8, 9 o'clock at night. And that goes on, and you do that for years. You just sort of generally wear yourself to the bone. I mean, and you have to step back and sort of at some point say, I need to look after myself first. Otherwise, it can't continue. That's what I had to do at the start of this year, was to sort of start to look. But I still slip into it, Just don't go back to that old way of doing it, because, like I say, the community that we're building, it's not a community for the sake of saying community like social media loves to love. It's a community of people that generally try to get to, in-person events, trying to speak to as many people as possible, you want to get to know their name, you want to get to know their story, you want to remember who they are so you can help them in future. And all of these sorts of things, that puts a lot of self-initiated pressure on your shoulders. When I don't think people really want it, but I just like doing it. So, I think burnout is a result of my own lack of looking after myself. I don't really know when that ends. I think I just go through that cycle. I sort of have to admit that will happen every now and then. I'll just have to sort of step away, and I do like getting out and about and sort of just escaping it, device free for a day or two. But
switching off.
Your missus then still catches you adding to the Slack channel when you're on the toilet or in the shower. You can't help yourself. You still got to get stuck in. So if you don't want to lead these things, I've now got the responsibility of other people in the team and hosts of events in parts of the world that they're awake when I'm asleep. If I want what's best for the wider community, then I've got to sort of put my neck on the line a bit, and I have to sort of get at ease with that. You've got to sort of not be well mindful of it.
Yeah, there's a lot of relatable stuff you're talking about there, because I just relate in terms of when I go through difficult periods of burnout, then that sort of low self-esteem thing, as you're saying there, that you kind of have a sort of like somebody else could do this better, or like you start kind of thinking that the work, I'm really bad at this, and there's so many other people that are like really better at this type of thing. That's a really negative mindset that can kind of come on. And the toxicity of that sort of masculine culture that we're brought up in, because I totally get it, because I also feel as though when maybe work is slow and I'm not kind of pulling in, my wife obviously has a regular job, regular paid income. And so like I can kind of fluctuate in terms of like how much I'm kind of bringing in. So when it's like a lot less, I feel as though I'm sort of letting them down and letting the family down. And this kind of weird idea, as you said, you were growing up with, that you're the provider, you're meant to be the provider of the family, and kind of being instilled that if I'm sort of not pulling in, if I'm not the breadwinner, as that term goes, if I'm not doing that, then I'm sort of like that plays on me. It's weird how that, I do think it's a mindset that is from that generation we were brought up with, Chris, that you're kind of like not you're half the man if you're if the wife is paying for everything, kind of if she's kind of getting the bills and stuff like that, So there's a lot of things that you're saying there that kind of ring true, where it's like it's such a stupid mindset, and my wife will try and snap me out of it and just kind of go. I realized that there was a period where, during her maternity leave, where I was I was bringing in most of the income and stuff like that. And she said, like, look, it's all just where it's combined, but there's this weird kind of mindset going on.
Yeah, psychology is sort of a difficult thing to ever sort of master in it, even if you're not, from an amateur perspective, you sort of look at it and sort of try and understand why these things happen. I think for me, in recent times, more than anything, because I've been through those sort of things, it's a case of, and that really started at the sort of festive break this year, when a little bit of downtime, was to start to sort of actually feel comfortable with me, who I am as a creative. I always sort of say, and this isn't to be put myself down, but not quite an average designer when I was a designer, just where it was. Can't do much about that. But that was when I was working for clients. So there's like a lot of priorities there that are in the way for you to be fully expressive. Because I think a lot of us enter because, like for me, like I was saying earlier, love like record sleeves or being at gigs and seeing posters and merch and flyers and all that sort of stuff. That's the reason I wanted to get into it. I wanted to, failed musician. So the closest thing I could get to it was, make CD covers. And that was, that was not my entry point. And that was what really unlocked a lot of my personal love for creativity. But then you get into the commercial world, and there's obviously different things. Businesses have different ideas. They're not going to let you, turn their work into some sort of, some crazy piece of artwork. It's about doing a job and to the brief. So sort of re-giving me that opportunity to be fully creative. So, our output is of our own making. So we use creativity in so many different ways. It's not just the visual sort of side of the design or what you see on social media or the promotional sort of side. It's like the structure of the business. I think that's like we were talking about the financial sort of side earlier. Yeah, that for me is a really creative decision. And we have many, many, many of those internally about what we do. Let's say like our in-person events, we're looking at loads of different forms of output and initiatives that we can do to make it a really interesting experience. So like sort of having that ability to have that output, where there's the freedom to let your mind do what it wants to do, instead of being the feeling of it being caged because it's a client relationship. I think that's something that I'd advise a lot of people to do. Is I understand that probably after your 9 to 5, you don't want to go home and start to start another project for yourself. But I think giving yourself that freedom to, and that could be anything. It could be like the way that you decorate your house, or the way that you do your garden. You can use creativity in so many different forms, but having that form of escapism. So I've started to not really enjoy cooking because that's all I think about when I'm doing it. It's still a creative pursuit, but I'm not there only an hour about the smallest of little things, or constantly on a line thinking that if you're not proactive or people can't see you are active, then you're not very good at what you do.
Yeah.
You sort of, I think having these like extracurricular activities where you can sort of, unlock what's in your head instead of bottling it up is a real nice way of overcoming some of those sort of things. But then obviously also, like, the natural ones of, finding boundaries at weekends. You're not on it all the time. And, I see a huge difference in my own personality when I'm not, on LinkedIn at 10 o'clock at night, or if I'm not, sort of furiously emailing people about tickets to an event on a Sunday evening when everyone else is enjoying their life. It's not going to make any difference if you send that message then. Wait till Monday or Tuesday when people are actually going to read it.
Yeah.
And there's these sort of all these sort of little things that sound then obvious that really go a long way, I think, just to alleviating that pressure in your mind to be something that you think everybody wants you to be, when really everybody just wants you to be you. And that's when you're at your best. And so I heard someone say something recently, and this is definitely something that I need to pay more attention to, because as you can tell, I talk a lot, is the idea that, as from a leading perspective, or from somebody that's trying to build something, being quiet, it goes a long way, because it allows people that may be under you or within a team or within your circle to feel like, you're listening and not just talking. So it's, things like that can really help.
Yeah, no, there's some good points there in terms of using your creativity, but away from this actual discipline of design. Yeah, absolutely. Just making for the sake of making as such, because I think that one of the things that's, we're sort of obsessed with commodifying everything, trying to, like, everything we do actually has to make money, anything creative, because we're sort of, we rely as these, especially like freelancers, that you rely on your creativity to earn money. So if you're not actually doing anything that makes you money because you're creative, then it's like not worthwhile. You kind of get into that mindset. But as you say, there's an escapism to kind of as you said, planning out the shrubs in the garden, or making a really nice curry, or I've kind of got back into sketching with charcoal of an evenings. I kind of get like black and white photo, and that escapism, that kind of anything that kind of takes you away and out of thinking about the emails 24/7 is very healthy, because I am more and more kind of, I get like, you can burn out doing the things that you love as much as the things you don't enjoy. So even if I'm on a project and I'm really getting stuck into it, I'll try and be disciplined and just go half an hour, just go for a walk outside, whatever, and then just kind of pack up at like 4 or 5 o'clock, and just be, when I'm gone, I'd leave my stuff here, and that's it. I don't think about it until I'm back into the studio again, and having those disciplines, because I totally recognize what you're saying there. When when you get into that, you get into a negative spiral where it's, the more burnt out you are, the more you're turning to these kind of devices, and you kind of feel as though you'll work your way out of it. That if I get on top of everything, then I'll stop feeling burnt out. But then you're kind of burning yourself out more, trying to get there. But it's, as you said yourself, you have to kind of, the world can wait. There's just take a day off, and come back tomorrow, and I guarantee nobody's died. The world hasn't been, nothing's gone on fire.
And I think
you can take your hand off the controls for a bit, and being a bit more relaxed with that kind of feeling.
Yeah, and I think that you could have sort of said it better, really. That idea that that if you leave it till tomorrow, or the following week, or even the following month, that I'm really reluctant to sort of sound like a sort of LinkedIn guru or some sort of cliche machine. But this idea that to be the best version of you is to sort of, you've got to put yourself first. That sort of, if you don't do that, and I can only say this through like recent experiences of sort of just constantly being like going full speed for way too long, is really detrimental to the whole project. It's in terms of like the knock-on effects of family, the people that you love the most, even all the way down to like the people that you work with. If you're not present, or you're not able to meet commitments because you're going too fast or too hard, it's just not a good way to live, really. And there is, I think sort of social media has got a huge amount to play with this, but specifically certain people that have got big voices, not within the media sort of area, where there's a lot of conflict in sort of self-interest in that. And I think people, especially younger people, that are easily influenced to sort of believe a lot of what gets said. And, I think you've got to somehow find a way, and this is another big shift for me, is to really sort of nail the purpose and what you're trying to do, and you follow that relatively rigidly, and you don't deviate. Because like when I was remember quite clearly when I first went into started my own agency, from week to week we'd offer different services or do different things, because you sort of followed either what was trendy or what was sort of what you thought might make the most money or make you the most gain the most popularity. But like with something like Right Aligned, we really worked hard to sort of write our own manifesto purely for my own benefit. It's not something we publish. And I've tweeted it since, but also spoke to a lot of people privately that I respect from different businesses and different sectors. And that's allowed me to really sort of follow a set path and not deviate from it. So there's a lot of, when things are difficult and you get things like burnout or well-being issues, you can return whenever it is that's right for you, to rejoin that path again, because it's not like we've faced adversity, because we to do what we want to do, you have to challenge and disrupt different things. Education is a big one, but then other areas of the industry which I think aren't doing what they should be doing. But to do that, you have to put your voice out there, and you have to be on the firing line a little bit, and that also leads to to sort of anxiety and well-being and mental health issues, because you start to sort of wonder if that was the right decision to make, or can you is it? That makes me realise how negative sort of toxic commentary is around projects, because when people start to aim at you, it can feel really, really isolating and lonely.
Yeah, absolutely.
So if you don't have that purpose to keep on going towards that longer term vision. And I think I never know why more designers don't sort of put that into place with their agencies or the things that they're building. They preach it to clients but don't do it themselves. Is to have those core values in place. Is to have that reason for keep on going. And it's not just because you want to make things look nice. There's got to be a bit more substance to it than that. And I think for us that's the thing that has really sort of put me back on the straight and narrow once I've overcome those difficulties. Is to really understand that we're on a longer term mission to make a difference than just have a couple of events or a couple of bits of online content. It's a bigger story than that. Like I say, to help me overcome those difficult moments like burnout, that's the good solution for me.
Solution, yeah. I saw a phrase: "Don't set yourself on fire to keep others warm," was the phrase, and I think that's a good way of thinking about it. To avoid burnout, and that's just giving too much of yourself away and not leaving enough for yourself left over. That you're burnout. It describes the phrase perfectly. Chris, that's been amazing. That was so excellent to kind of get your story behind Right Aligned. RightAlignedAcademy.com. If people want to go on there, and as I said, the price points are ridiculously low compared to a lot of other educational resources. And you can find events on Eventbrite for the live kind of conversations, and Process as well. Where are the Process events coming up? Where are they being held?
Yeah, so if you look, you can follow the Process on. We've got a main account on Instagram and LinkedIn, but then each of the cities have got their own accounts that are run by the hosts of those places. Then the forthcoming program is next Thursday. But this podcast will be going on obviously at different times relative to today. Next one is Sydney, and then Leeds and Berlin, and then we're doing a special edition of Process Manchester at Motion North, which is a big 2-day festival, which is really exciting. So we're
brilliant
collaborating with other people, and then we'll be back in Manchester the week after that, and then in London and Sydney, and then we'll do it all again in the spring, and then the summer, and then the autumn.
Fabulous, man. Yeah, excellent. Glad to see them popping up internationally as well.
So that was Chris there. What a great guy. As I said in the intro, it was actually quite a therapeutic session in the end. Far more therapeutic than the episodes we've had previously. Go to rightalignedacademy.com for Chris's output on that front. All the workshops are there, and 60 quid for the subscription for the year is a bit of a bargain, I think. I also subscribe to Right Aligned Academy on Eventbrite, and that way I get notifications about live events that are coming up. And the live events are great because Chris just asked for a donation on those, so they're as expensive as you want them to be, or as your budget can allow. My falafel was really nice, actually. Thanks very much. It was a little bit on the dry side. I didn't get the hummus to falafel ratio right, but I've been failing at a lot of things this year, but I am absolutely smashing my lunchtimes lately. I hope that keeps up for 2026. This was the penultimate episode. I do have Freya McLeod coming up next week. Freya is from another Isle of Lewis resident, a Leoshuk native. So Freya worked with me at Loom Graphics in the studio, and I don't know if you noticed, but the majority of my guests have been straight white middle-aged men of a and so I had been on the lookout for people of a slightly to broaden diversity of it, but generally there was a few people kind of postponing maybe till season 2 type of thing when they're ready. And I thought Freya had postponed initially, but Freya thankfully came back and was like, "Oh, I'm ready to do it now." So I was like, "Grand, great," because I was going to stop at 6, but you kind of get a bonus 7th episode next week. Freya is a designer, studied environmental design in Duncan of Jordanston, DJ CAD. And yeah, and she's generally just a good pal of mine. So yeah, it's great to have her on. So that's next week's episode. Hope you do join, join in, join in. It's late in the day, and I'm full of flaffle. Yeah, if you join in and subscribe, and again do all that algorithmic friendly stuff, and even share it and tell your dog and stuff like that, all that stuff. Catch me at Wise Love Studio on the socials, Wise Love Studio. Do send me an email. I'm desperate to hear some feedback. I'm kind of getting some snippets. There's been some very positive things, and a lot of people enjoying the podcast, and the numbers have been pretty healthy. So, yeah, I'm really seeing this first season as a kind of a real tester in terms of podcasts, and a learning journey for myself about putting this whole new medium out there. And yeah, anyway, fizzling out as ever. See you next week. Bye.